Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. On the program, we return to the country of Sri Lanka, a country whose history we've explored before, as well as its current affairs. Tonight, my guest is returning champion, and forgive me, Pizza, because I am about to butcher your name. But our returning champion is Pitasanna Shanmugathas. Sorry, Pitts. I am a Yankee idiot in that respect, so apologies for that. A Canadian indie documentary filmmaker, journalist, often writing for the Jurist, an anti-imperialist, and all-round leftist. And today we'll be exploring the subject of his new documentary, Neelan Unsilenced, about a Tamil Sri Lankan legal scholar, international consultant in international relations, a politician, and peace activist and peace mediator and constitutional scholar and activist reformist who believed in a united Sri Lanka and for his efforts was sadly murdered, not by rabid Sinhalese ethnonationalists and chauvinists and sectarians. Nope, he was murdered by the Tamil Tigers. The film explores and celebrates his life's work and his legacy and the tragedy of someone who tirelessly fought for a just peace and inclusive society, and yet was sadly murdered by his own. So let's get into it. First of all, Pizza, thanks for coming back on the program.
Thanks for having me on again, Yuri, and for allowing me to speak about my new documentary on your program. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's a real honor to have you on, and yeah, and honestly, thanks so much for doing this film. We actually did an interview about this a couple of months ago, and now the film is complete. I got the chance to see it. I started watching it last night and then finished all of it today, mostly in its entirety. And it's a very fascinating film, and I guess and very fascinating subject, very interesting chapter that I think even people who follow Sri Lankan affairs probably don't even know that much about, which we're going to get into, with some of the questions I have on. So the first question then, so firstly, explain to us the subject of the film, and we already explored this, and like I said, we already explored this topic a few months ago, but just do explain to us the documentary, and then my follow-up question would be, what was one or two elements of this story when working on the film that surprised you?
Um, so this film is about as you had mentioned in your intro, about a uh, Sri Lankan Tamil-born politician, constitutional scholar named Neelan Tiruchelvam, and in Sri Lanka, uh, he was born Neelan, despite being a minority Tamil in Sri Lanka, he was born into a very affluent family, a very upper class family, at a time where the country, a majority of the country, regardless of whether the fact they were part of the majority Sinhala community or the minority Tamil community, significant segments of the country were impoverished. But Neelan grew up in a family that was very economically affluent. His father was a solicitor, was an attorney general, and then became a minister for local government. And growing up, Neelan saw he was born 4 years prior to Sri Lanka gaining independence from the British, and as soon as Sri Lanka gained independence from the British, the Sinhala majority immediately began enacting discriminatory policies that disenfranchised the minority Tamil people and empowered the Sinhala majority. Uh, Most notably, the Sinhala Only Act, which resulted in Sinhala being the sole official language of the country. So Tamils that during British rule disproportionately occupied the civil sector and they occupied the military sector. They occupied various sectors of the government. They were immediately fired. Practically overnight. It was a huge economic disenfranchisement of the Tamil minority people, and this policy was done by the Sinhalese people as a retaliatory attack against the Tamil minority because under British rule, the minority Tamils were disproportionately favored by the British to lead the British's civil administration within Ceylon. So the Tamil minority, 40% approximately were in the military, significant disproportionate amount were in the civil sector, in engineering backgrounds, teaching. So in all these different affluent parts of the society, Tamil people, despite the fact that they constituted less than 20% of the nation's population, they would occupy 40%, 35%, disproportionate numbers, relative to their small size within the country as a whole. So the Sinhalese were very bitter about this. So they began enacting discriminatory policies. There were pogroms, Sinhala-led pogroms against the Tamil minority. So Neelan grew up around seeing this, and his father, being a minister of local government within the parliament, was trying to bring about federalism, advocating for federalism as a solution to address the grievances of the Tamil minority community who were subjected to discriminatory legislation, pogroms, and Neelan. He was born in 1944. Sri Lanka had its independence in 1948 from the British. So growing up, Neelan saw all this, and he was influenced by his father significantly to champion federalism as a solution where different communities can coexist together on the island. And he would then go on to, as a Harvard-educated constitutional scholar, would then go on to draft these bold set of proposals known as the Union of Regions proposals, which to date remain the boldest attempt to redress the grievances of the Tamil minority communities. And Neelan was doing this, advocating this during a time where there was a civil war in the country. So decades of pogroms and single-led violence against the Tamil minorities in 1983 triggered a 25-year civil war whereby numerous Tamil separatist rebel groups were waging an offensive against the Sri Lankan government for their own separate state in the heavily Tamil populated north and east of Sri Lanka. And so Neelan, in 1995, was advocating for a federal solution, a solution under United Sri Lanka, when the civil war and the armed struggle was at its peak, peak popularity. And so Neelan, by doing this, was vilified severely by Tamil separatists, and that ultimately cost him his life. So that's a significant portion of the documentary is about. But it's also important to mention that the documentary talks about Neelan as being an international figure, not just solely confined to Sri Lanka. But Neelan was trying to promote democracy all over the global south. Neelan was a pioneer in democratic election monitoring in the global south. And so he was participating in democratic election monitoring in places like Chile, Bangladesh, in places like South Africa. He was championing for democratic transition. Neelan firmly believed that democracy was the groundwork in which all other forms of progress within a society can come about. So Neelan took part in overseeing the plebiscite that happened in Chile, where in 1988 the Chilean people were given a referendum essentially to choose whether or not they wanted an additional 7 years of the dictator Augusto Pinochet ruling them, or whether they wanted to move to democratic elections. So Neelan was part of was monitoring the election, the vote tabulations. And we also look at Neelan's influence in Kazakhstan. So immediately after the Soviet Union broke up, Kazakhstan was a significant nuclear power. It had significant natural resources. So Kazakhstan was this country that many foreign corporations were looking at to invest in. So Kazakhstan needed a constitution that would prevent ethnic divide and secessionist conflict because you had different ethnic groups in Kazakhstan. So Neelan, as a result of his education of being born in Sri Lanka and seeing ethnic conflict and violence and what you needed in order to bridge different communities together, Neelan took that knowledge, applied it in cases like Chile and in Kazakhstan, and Neelan made contributions to what became Kazakhstan's constitution. And so you have to look at Neelan, this documentary. We show Neelan, we put significant emphasis on his Sri Lanka contributions, but we also show Neelan as being an international figure, that he did so much work in other countries in pioneering democratic election monitoring in Chile, Kazakhstan. So you have to look at Neelan as a global human rights figure, not just solely with Sri Lanka.
Was it his time that he spent in Chile and Kazakhstan that surprised you the most? I thought,
Oh, sorry, that was your other question, right?
yeah,
Oh, what was it that surprised me the most about Neelan?
yeah,
Um, I think what surprised me the most about him was the depth of his sacrifice. The depth of his sacrifice in the sense that Neelan was somebody who he went to Harvard Law School. You know, he got his master's degree, his PhD in law at Harvard Law School. He was a phenomenally intelligent man, a constitutional scholar. He could have gotten diplomatic appointments working for the UN or in any cushy job in any global affairs sector in any part of the world. But he didn't want that. Neelan was very humble in the sense that he wanted to go back to his roots, and he was willing to put himself in harm's way because he firmly believed that he had something meaningful to contribute with respect to ending the ethnic conflict in his country, and he thought that he could do that through peaceful means. So the depth of his devotion and sincerity, despite the fact that probably other people in his circle were advising him, hey, you could just get some job in a cushy office, and you're being threatened. Your life is being threatened here in Sri Lanka. You don't have to be here, And he avoided all that, and he was somebody who was extremely, enormously humble, and that's something that was routinely told to me that despite the fact that he was as Harvard educated, scholar, he lectured at Harvard University, Harvard Law School. Despite this fact that he was so high up there, at the time that he died, Neelan was the chairperson for the minority rights group based in London, UK, which is a very distinguished human rights group. So he was a global human rights champion at the time that he died. So much so that Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton issued a public condolence, saying that it was such a tragedy that Neelan Tiruchelvam died at the hands of terrorists in Sri Lanka. So he had attracted the eyes of the most powerful person on the planet at the time, Bill Clinton. And so he was somebody who was very high up in the human rights field, leading, pioneering figure. And he was extremely humble and modest. So I think the depth of his sincerity, of his convictions, and his humility is something that really it deeply moved me. I think I'll say that much. It deeply moved me.
yeah. And when watching this documentary, even even when watching the trailer of the documentary, which you already kind of get like a huge sadness. But certainly when you watch the documentary, even watching the interviews and articles that you've given on it, this is the kind of guy who you think should definitely be getting peace prizes and stuff like that. And I recently, just about 3 hours ago, watched the documentary, and I was surprised that not only this man existed, but that Sri Lanka was actually close to peace, and yet the ruling governments, factions within the ruling party that governed at the time, the opposition, and even the Tamil Tigers themselves all went out of their way to sabotage, make issues far more complicated than need be. And again, that the Tamils themselves and Tamil speaking journalists themselves, okay, one can have their opposition and present an alternative proposition to Sri Lanka's problems, but that they deliberately didn't tell their readers, their listeners, their communities, hey, look at what this guy from our community has put in this new constitutional proposal. Look at what he's advocating. If like that stunned me. And this chapter in Sri Lankan history, I'm curious, is it a much censored part of the history of post-independence war-torn Sri Lanka? And why do you think and if the answer is yes, why do you think it is so widely censored amongst all parties in this tragic civil war, which has only been which has been over for a few years, but still many scars and open wounds?
It's definitely a censored part of Sri Lanka's history, and that is one of the things that drove me to do this documentary. Is because that I first came upon Neelan Tiruchelvam, his life and legacy. I first came upon his work through reading articles by a Sri Lankan Tamil journalist who was living in Canada in the diaspora by the name of DBS Jayaraj. That's when I first significantly became exposed to his work, learning about the proposals that he had helped formulate for constitutional reform in Sri Lanka and its significance. And when I read this and at the Tamil community within Canada where I live, and there was nothing that was being said about Neelan Tiruchelvam, there was about his proposals, despite the fact that they are to date, the proposals were drafted 30 years ago. Today, they remain the boldest, most progressive attempt to address the grievances of the minority communities. There was no talk in the Tamil diaspora about Neelan. So I felt at that point, that's what significantly drove me to tell this man's story. And so the silencing of his legacy in that regard is primarily due to the efforts of the Tamil Tigers, which was the rebel group, the Tamil rebel separatist group that was primarily leading the effort during the Civil War to violently achieve a separate state for the Tamil-speaking people in the north and east of the country. They had vilified Neelan severely during his life, and even in death, and even now, they vilified him as a traitor because he was a member of the Tamil minority community, and he was not advocating for the separatist cause, and instead he was advocating for a united Sri Lanka where through constitutional reform we can redress the grievances of the minority communities, and we can implement checks and balances in a new constitution that would prevent the singular-dominated central government from unilaterally taking away powers given to the regions, such as the Tamil regions of the country. That was Neelan's vision, where Sri Lankans of all backgrounds, Tamils, Sinhalese, Muslims, Burghers, which are the Portuguese, those who descended from during the time the Portuguese were ruling Sri Lanka, the Indian plantation Tamils, where all these different communities in Sri Lanka could coexist. And this was firmly against the vision of the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, who believed in a separate state. For the LTTE, if you are against or even critical of the LTT's actions, then you are anti-Tamil. Or if you do anything that goes against the LTT's vision, you are anti-Tamil. So Neelan was subjected to a brutal, vicious vilification campaign called a traitor, called somebody that was subservient to the single government. Even though Neelan, during his time in Parliament, repeatedly, Neelan would voice condemnation of the atrocities being committed by the Sri Lankan government against Tamil people, with respect to the numerous acts of torture, arbitrary detainment, the government's abuse of the Prevention of Terrorism Act against Tamils. Neelan spoke about the Sri Lankan army's allegations that there were mass graves of Tamil people in the north and the need for this to be investigated. There's been recently, Neelan called for this in 1998 for there to be an investigation into mass graves of Tamils being carried out by Sri Lankan army soldiers in the north. And Neelan called for in Parliament in 1998 for an investigation. And Neelan outlined using UN protocols a way to impartially carry out this investigation. And in February of this year, there were mass graves that were exposed in the north, precisely what Neelan was warning about. And now Neelan's speech very much can act as a blueprint for what's needed for an impartial investigation, which is what people in the Tamil people in the north are calling for now. So Neelan was very much speaking out about atrocities against Tamil people, yet at the same time, he was being vilified by the LTT as a traitor, by the Tamil separatists as a traitor. So when he died, the LTT had been significantly successful in silencing his voice and in making sure that his legacy for a federal solution is forgotten. So, that's what drove me to significantly unsilence Neelan's voice. And so hence the name of the documentary, Neelan Unsilenced.
That's a perfect segue to this question. Your film isn't really just a story about Dr. Neelan, but it's a story which explores the dark side of the Tamil Tigers, something we've explored before on the program twice. The Tamil Tigers, who've long been celebrated and defended by many left-leaning people and anti-imperialists who often compare the plight and grievances of the Tamil people and the quest for a separate Tamil state as a noble national liberation and a leftist one. And some will even compare the Tamil Tigers to the legitimate but also dark side of Kurdish nationalism, the provisional IRA in Northern Ireland, and or Palestinian liberation. And Kurdish nationalism and the IRA also has a dark side in that the way Kurdish separatist movements and the IRA, the way they've engaged with folks within their community or those they perceive as enemies is just plain wrong and criminal. And you've talked with voices in your documentary who are Tamil, who do believe in a united Sri Lanka. One of the female voices that you interviewed, who had a loved one who was a Tamil Sri Lankan peacenik murdered by the Tamil Tigers. Can you talk to our audience about this, and why should folks be careful when they lionize the Tamil Tigers and express support for Tamil nationhood as opposed to a united Sri Lanka?
Yeah. So one of the people that I interview in the documentary, her name is Sharika Thirunagama, and her mother was killed by the LTTE. She was a doctor, a Tamil doctor, and she had been part of the initially been a member of the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers. She then left the Tamil Tigers and was increasingly expressing criticism of some of their atrocities, exposing some of their atrocities as part of this human rights group that she was part of, the University of Jaffna Teachers for Human Rights. So she was a medical teacher, part of the University of Jaffna, and so this human rights group consisted of academics and individuals part of the University of Jaffna, which is a university in the north of Sri Lanka, the Tamil dominated north of Sri Lanka. So within this human rights group, Rajini Tirunagama was voicing criticism of the LTT's atrocities, but also was increasingly vocal about a peaceful way to resolve the war, which meant that she opposed a separate state for the Tamil people, which was the LTT's main ideology. And as a result, she was assassinated by the LTTE on her bike while she was riding home. She was shot by the LTTE. And her daughter, I interviewed her daughter, Sharika Thirunagama, and she's a professor at Stanford University, a political anthropologist. And she basically talks about why Neelan was opposed by the LTT, and the reason she gives in the documentary is because Neelan was advocating for an alternative, a feasible alternative solution to that of a separate state, and he was doing this in his capacity as a legitimate Tamil academic, somebody who is principled, and the fact that Neelan's proposals were gaining traction among segments of the Tamil community. At the time Neelan's proposals were released, they were praised by more than 100 academics and distinguished figures in Sri Lanka as being a sensible way to resolve the ethnic conflict. And so the fact that Neelan was proposing a feasible alternative way to that of a separate state was incomprehensible to the LTTE, who solely viewed a separate state as the only solution to resolve to the ethnic conflict. There was simply no coexisting with the Sinhala majority. And so that was the ultimate reason why Neelan had to be killed, because that voice of moderation, of coexistence, had to be silenced. And I think it's problematic to compare the LTTE to the Palestinian liberation struggle, and I think it's also for one main reason, which I still get into arguments today in Twitter with very pro LTT people. In the case of Sri Lanka, Neelan was advocating for what was the international consensus, which is a solution to the ethnic conflict under a united Sri Lanka. And significant number of countries like Canada, the United States, India, Norway, the European Union, they voiced support for federalism as being a solution to the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka. There is not one single state in the world that has called for a separate Tamil state as being the solution to the ethnic conflict. The overwhelming international consensus is for the Tamils' grievances to be resolved under a united Sri Lanka through constitutional reform. So Neelan was very much expressing the international consensus, which is the most feasible and practical way to address the grievances of the minority communities. In the case of the Palestinian liberation struggle, the overwhelming international consensus is for a two-state solution on the pre-June 67 lines, with East Jerusalem being the capital of a Palestinian state, West Jerusalem being the capital of an Israeli state, with minor and mutual land swaps. That is the international consensus. That's been the international consensus for nearly 60 years.
Although I do not want to get off topic, although we at 1+1 and other people at 1+1, we do advocate for the democratic secular one-state solution. But anyways, but that's a whole other topic for another day. But anyways, but go back to Sri Lanka and why why Palestine's liberation is one should not conflate Tamil liberation with Palestine liberation.
Yeah, the point being is that among an overwhelming majority of states in the UN, the consensus has been a two-state solution in the case of the Palestinian liberation struggle. That's not the case within the Sri Lankan ethnic conflict, and it can never be the case for numerous geopolitical reasons. The consensus has to be a united Sri Lanka through a federal solution, whereby significant powers devolve to the regions, and there are protections in place that would prevent the Sinhala-dominated central government from unilaterally taking away power given to the regions. And the even if there was a separate state, if a separate state was achieved, I mean, this is discussed in the documentary, that separate state would crumble immediately because there's a significant amount of hetero, heterogeneous population. There in the north and the east, you have Tamils, you have Muslims, you have Sinhalese people, you have Christians, Catholics, you have burghers, you have all these different populations, and and the Muslims who constitute a significant population in the east of the country, they do not identify as Tamil, despite the fact that they speak Tamil. They identify as their own ethnic group, and so you have all these different ethnic groups who don't subscribe to this ethno-nationalist agenda of a Tamil state. Anytime ethno-nationalism rears its ugly head, it's never proven to be successful, a democratic experiment. Having ethno-nationalism and democracy, it does not combine, and we've seen that for decades in the terms of Sinhala nationalism, where the Sinhalese try to promote this notion that these Sinhalese nationalists try to promote this notion that this is a Sinhalese only state, and we've seen the blowback of that. So Neelan was somebody who firmly was opposed to nationalist sentiment because he knew that nationalism and democracy could not coexist. He thought that all of us were all Sri Lankans, and our different ethnicities and linguistic backgrounds should be acknowledged, certainly, and our identities should be respected, certainly, but that should happen within a democratic framework where all of us could coexist with equal rights. What ethno-nationalism says is that one certain ethnic group has more rights, is more superior, and I think that's the fundamental problem in the case of voicing a separate state. It's not feasible, and it's not. I would argue it's not desirable either.
Uh, you brilliantly just actually made the case of of why of why even if one is sympathetic and empathetic to a separate Tamil state, why that would be extremely problematic, and we have seen that precedent even in Kurdish separatism and yeah, in Kurdish separatism and so forth. And I just want to read some quotes before I get to this next question. Sort of piggybacking on what you were saying about about the Tamil Tigers and the dark side of the Tamil Tigers. So this is from the Sri Lankan Tamil journalist, and forgive me if I'm butchering his name, Ignatius Lukanathan. He recounts the following. The Tamil media never gave any publicity to the devolution proposals. While deliberately keeping the Tamil community uninformed, he described how Neelan was vilified. They took Neelan independently, defamed him, and vehemently wrote articles, editorials, and cartoons portraying him as a traitor. And this one by Dr. Sharika, who we talked about at the beginning of this question. Whose own mother was murdered by the Tamil Tigers, explains the LTTE had a real institutionalized propaganda machine. And she underscores that for the LTTE, anybody who worked in any way with the Sri Lankan state who was Tamil was therefore fair game. Neelan's democratic proposals in alignment with the Sri Lankan government made him a prime target for the LTTE, which opposed any solution that did not involve their complete control. And his elder son, who you interview, commented, to put it this way, the entire population of Sri Lanka, except for the LTTE leader's immediate family, was on his hit list. This amounted to about 20 million people with varying levels of priority. It was an extraordinary long hit list. You could say my father and the politicians were near top of it. Anything more you want to say before I get to this fifth question?
Uh, no, but I think those voices they articulate, what a threat Neelan despite the fact that he was pursuing a democratic vision, a vision of coexistence, the threat that he posed to uh, Tamil separatists who were firmly opposed to any sort of framework in which they could peacefully coexist with the other communities on the island. And they were doing this at the expense of prolonging the civil war with more and more lives being killed and slaughtered by the Sri Lankan army and even by the LTT, the Tamil Tigers themselves. That was the consequence of not having accepted Neelan's proposals, uh, whereby the LTTE didn't was refusing to negotiate with it, but also one of the rival Sri Lankan parties, the United National Party, was refusing to negotiate with it. And the consequence of those two forces refusing to negotiate to consider Neelan's very progressive proposals is that it prolonged the war and led to more and more Tamils being killed until ultimately in 2009 there was a horrendous massacre where tens of thousands of Tamils were killed within a very short period of time. And that's how this documentary starts. It starts with the 2009 during the final stages of the war. Well, what would have happened if Neelan's proposals had been accepted, and could that have saved tens of thousands of lives? And then the documentary goes from there. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say.
And did you? I'm curious what you thought about the Sri Lankan president at the time. Did you, once upon a time, dislike the president of Sri Lanka during this time? Uh, Forgive me again. I'm about to butcher a name. Shandarika Kumatunga, and her party was the People's Alliance. But and I'm curious that when researching Dr. Neelan's life and exploring the dark side of the Tamil Tigers, did you come to reevaluate her legacy and be slightly more positive to her, given her very strong efforts to make peace and make huge concessions to the Tamils? Certainly, the Tamil Tigers, who who and of course, certainly the Tamil Tigers, who insisted that they were the sole representatives of the Tamils in Sri Lanka and the diaspora when it came to trying to, negotiate peace, a just peace. I'm curious your response.
Uh, yeah, in the case of Chandrika Kumartunga, I don't think there's any question that uh, when she was elected president in 1994, her intentions to resolve the ethnic conflict were genuine and sincere. And we saw that based on how fast she moved. As soon as she became president, she was already in talks with the Tamil Tigers to reach a ceasefire, and that ceasefire was reached. Uh, she became president in November '94, and by January '95, a ceasefire was reached with the LTT, and she had already begun talks to assemble a team of constitutional experts to formulate a new constitution uh, uh, to resolve the ethnic conflict in a peaceful means. If I could just step back briefly, when she won the presidential elections, she won with 62% of the national vote, which was significant because that meant a significant number of Sinhalese people in the South and even Tamil people in the North both aligned and said, we want a peaceful solution to end the war. We're tired of, this decade-long conflict, which has taken thousands and thousands of lives, Tamil and Sinhalese lives. We want a peaceful end to the war. So you had Sinhalese and Tamil people both supporting that vision. And then when she introduced her proposals, publicly released those proposals, called the Union of Regions proposals in August 3rd of 1995. Those proposals were bold and significant in the sense that it 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 advocated for a complete restructuring of the Sri Lankan state. So Sri Lanka's current system of governance, even to the present day, uh, is under a unitary state. So, in a unitary state, in Sri Lanka's constitution, a unitary state means that there is significant power that's consolidated at the center, by the central government, And the way that Sri Lanka's governing system operates is that power from the center is devolved to the regions, but under Sri Lanka's constitution, those powers could be unilaterally taken away under any pretense. So, to have a system where the central government gives powers, devolves powers to the regions, but those powers can be taken away under any pretense, such a system was fundamentally viewed as unjust by the Tamils and the Sinhalese because the Tamils, they had been subjected to decades long oppression and violence at the hands of the Sinhala nationalists, which was supported by the Sinhala dominated government too. So to have a power structure, a governing system whereby the Sinhalese government can devolve power to the regions and then they can unilaterally take them away. Such a model, it's incompatible with the grievances that the Tamil minority have, which is that they want their autonomy and they want to be guaranteed that rights that are given to them can't be taken away by any government, a single government that comes into power. For the Sinhalese, this governing structure is they're opposed to it as well because it renders the Sinhala politicians in the regions of Sri Lanka, like Sinhala chief ministers, Sinhala local ministers, it doesn't give them any power, any real power either, because the government can just take away whatever powers it gives to the regions, can unilaterally take them away as well. So you have a situation where Tamils and Sinhalese, they're both are frustrated by the current governing system of Sri Lanka, and they want a system whereby power is devolved to the regions, but those powers can't be unilaterally taken away. So what Chandrika's proposals did is it did away with this notion of Sri Lanka being a unitary state, and instead it said that Sri Lanka will be a union of regions. The Neelan's proposals envisage there being 8 autonomous regions whereby significant power is devolved with respect to land, education, policing, finance, and those powers, there were significant checks and balances put in place whereby, for instance, the governor that's appointed by the central government, that governor had to be accountable to the interests of the chief minister of the region, and the chief minister had to be accountable to the interests of the local government. So there were like numerous checks and balances in place whereby it would make it extremely difficult for the central government to then come in and take away those powers. And there was a dispute resolution mechanism put into Neelan's proposals whereby if there were any issues of dispute whereby a certain issue, the regions felt that they should have they should have control over it, and the central government felt they should have control over it. There was a mediation mechanism put in place whereby all the politicians within all the regions, the 8 regions across Sri Lanka, would discuss and collaborate and come to a consensus, working with the central government in order to find a solution to any grievances. So you had these numerous checks and balances in place. You had mediation mechanisms. You had the total doing away with this unitary state. So all of this was fundamentally groundbreaking and progressive. It's never been advocated in Sri Lankan history, and it hasn't been advocated since. So Neelan was advocating all these things, and Chandrika, she was the president, so she was the main person advocating all of this. And so all of those initiatives by Chandrika Kumartunga as president were sincere. One of
but unfortunately, factions within her own party, the opposition, and the Tamil Tigers themselves, who insisted that they are the sole representatives of all Tamil people, sabotaged it, basically, correct?
Absolutely. So when she released the proposals, she was hoping that the LTTE would negotiate with these proposals. She released these proposals on August 3rd, 1995. The ceasefire that was reached with the LTT in January of 1995, the LTT was demanding, in order to maintain the ceasefire, the LTTE was demanding that President Kumaratunga ease the embargo and the restrictions that she had placed on the LTTE dominated north and east of the country, like fishing embargoes, embargoes, economic embargoes, embargoes that prevented goods from coming into the country. So the LTT was demanding the restriction of these embargoes. So President Kumartunga, she did lift some of the restrictions, but she didn't lift all of the restrictions that the LTT demanded. I think the primary reason for that is because she needed to have the support of the military as well. Like she couldn't be perceived as being somebody who gave into all of the LTT's demands, because then she would lose support by the military and she might get thrown out of office. But the LTTE used the fact that she did not accept all of their demands as the reason for breaking the ceasefire in April of 1995. And so Prabhakaran then launched a naval attack against the Sri Lankan naval forces, and the war resumed. There was significant atrocities being committed by both sides during this period. But still, even after April 1995, Chandrika was working towards formulating a constitutional reform proposal to try and bring the LTT back to the table and to show the LTT their sincerity in resolving this conflict through peaceful means. So when the August 3rd proposals in August 3rd, 1995, Chandrika released her proposals, there was dead silence on the part of the LTT. They simply refused to negotiate with the proposals. They would not even entertain the proposals. And then there was also an unwillingness by the rival faction of the Sri Lankan state, the rival faction, the rival political party, which was the United National Party. So Chandrika's party was the People's Alliance, and the rival party was the United National Party. And anytime you had a history in Sri Lanka since independence, anytime there was one majority single party in power, such as the United National Party, that party would try to make some sort of compromise with the Tamils, and then the opposing party, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, which was the party in which Chandrika Kumaratunga was part of, the People's Alliance, they would sabotage the efforts by the other party. So because you had both rival parties, they were saying no, we're the party that has the best interest of the Sinhalese people. They were engaging in petty ethnic outbidding against one another to score political points. So when Chandrika released these proposals, the United National Party picked some issue to just oppose the proposal. So the reason the United National Party opposed the proposals was not because of the powers it was giving to the regions, or the fact that it was quote unquote federalism in all but name, which is what Sri Lankan Tamil academics like Pakiasoti Sarvanamuthu, who I interviewed in this documentary, he called it federalism in all but name. The reason why the United National Party opposed the proposals wasn't because of that. The reason why the United National Party opposed the proposals is because there was a provision within Chandrika's proposals which resulted in the executive presidency. So Sri Lanka has an executive presidential system whereby there's a president in Sri Lanka, but he has executive powers. He or she has executive powers that can curb the will of the parliament. And so the Chandrika's proposals, what it proposed was to abolish the executive presidency, which is a good thing, but it wouldn't do it immediately, but would do it within a certain gradual period. So the United National Party said, "Oh no, you're not being sincere. You have to abolish the executive presidency immediately." So the United National Party used that trivial thing as this as a plan as their sort of obstacle to oppose the proposals, but it was totally trivial. And but that was just a recurring history within Sri Lankan politics, which exists to this day. So her efforts. So what Chandrika ended up doing to try to satisfy the United National Party to get the 2/3 majority to pass the proposals, because when Chandrika came into power, she did not have the constitutional 2/3 majority needed to pass the proposals. So she took Neelan's proposals and she diluted them. She made them weaker and weaker. So in 1997 and 2000, she did away with the mediation mechanism, for instance, within the proposals, which were so popular among the Tamils. She did away with those proposals. And by the time she introduced the proposals on August 3rd, 2000 in Parliament for to be voted on, the Tamil United Liberation Front, which was the Democratic Tamil political party in Sri Lanka, which was Neelan's party, they rejected the proposals because they were so watered down from Neelan's original proposals. And the United National Party, they tore up the proposals and they lit them on fire within the chambers of Parliament. So that ended Chandrika's efforts in terms of constitutional reform. But Chandrika's legacy during her time as president is also criticized for certain atrocities that were committed by the Sri Lankan armed forces during the conflict. Once the LTT broke the conflict, the Sri Lankan army, they engaged in a significant offensive whereby significant civilians died as well. So she's criticized for that. And then when she was president as well, after Neelan had died in 2002, Norway came into Sri Lanka to be a mediator between the Sri Lankan government and the LTTE to try to mediate a negotiated solution under a united Sri Lanka. So during that time, Chandrika and the United National Party, they were rivaling for power. So Chandrika, when the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, were favoring the United National Party as being their preferred negotiator during the Norway brokered peace talks, Chandrika would kind of sabotage those efforts. And so it was kind of like rivalry back and forth again. So unfortunately, her attempts at constitutional reform were unsuccessful, and Norway's mediation in Sri Lanka was unsuccessful, and the war ended in a vicious, brutal way.
Very sad, very very sad and disappointing. When you really think about it. Uh, uh, Actually, before I get into this question, I have to ask this question because it seemed as if Dr. Neelan's proposals would have been just fantastic for Sri Lanka. Did his time in Kazakhstan influence how he tried to approach Tamil politics? And I don't know how much you know about Lebanon as a as a failed state and a ridiculous sectarian bloc that it is. But do you think a country like Lebanon, if Dr. Neelan was involved in redoing the constitution there, his what would have been like the perfect Sri Lankan model if it was implemented the way he originally envisioned would be great for a country like Lebanon.
In the case of Kazakhstan, I, I would argue that Neelan's experiences in Sri Lanka significantly influenced what he did in Kazakhstan, and not so much the reverse,
Oh, okay.
whereby
It's interesting.
so
Interesting.
so
Okay.
Neelan in Sri Lanka is a country that has pluralistic, diverse communities, and Kazakhstan is a country that has multiple different pluralistic communities as well. So Neelan took his experience in terms of the need for minorities to have rights, for civil liberties to be protected, and Neelan, in his recommendation to Kazakhstan in terms of the constitution, was consistently advocating for the rights of minorities to be protected, the rights for people to be respected regardless of their religion, their language, their ethnic background. That was where Neelan was consistently leading the effort in terms of Kazakhstan's discussions about how their constitution is going to, the framework is going to be worked out. And Neelan consistently advocated that there had to be ways in which Kazakhstan people at the local government could have a level of autonomy similar to what he advocated for in Sri Lanka. So I would argue he took his experiences in Sri Lanka and put them in Kazakhstan. One of the people that we interviewed, Steve Cantor, who was Neelan's partner in terms of the consultancy effort in Kazakhstan, he had said that many of their recommendations were adopted into Kazakhstan's official constitution. In the case of Lebanon, I'm not too familiar about their governing framework, so I don't want to I can't comment on that. But Neelan was somebody who advocated for democratic governance, whereby communities from diverse backgrounds can coexist. So he would have probably advocated for some sort of power sharing framework under a constitutional structure, whereby there's power given to to the regions, and whereby people are not discriminated based on their ethnic background, or religious background, or language background, and they're able to. There are provisions and checks in place which would also result in the representation of minority communities in the central government, while also respecting the autonomies of the various regions of Sri Lanka as well. So I
That's
think that ideology could certainly be applied in Lebanon as well.
fascinating. And your film is not only a celebration of this wonderful and extraordinary person, but it's a celebration uh, of voices that you sought out and platforms of other Tamils who believed in a united Sri Lanka, who believed a united Sri Lanka could be advanced. Your thoughts on this, and what are the current affairs of Tamil people in both Sri Lanka and the diaspora? Is the desire for a separate state still very strong, or are the often silenced and self-censorious voices who, like Dr. Neelan and the voices he spoke to, will their voices and the and the move and that movement make a huge comeback? I'm curious your response.
uh, well, within the diaspora, I think we still have a case where the loud Tamil nationalist voices are still advocating for a separate state, and I've often interacted with these voices on social media networks like Twitter and Facebook, and any notion of trying to coexist with singular people is unfathomable to them. And I keep going back to this in my arguments with them. I keep going back to this vision that Neelan had of democratic coexistence, and we have a framework, a blueprint to do that. And the fact that a significant number of Sinhalese people want to coexist with Tamils and with the minority communities. In contrast to the case of Israel, Israel doesn't want to coexist with Arabs. They want to see them exterminated, or at the very least ethnically cleansed from the land. And this is practically every Israeli Jewish person who wants to, almost every Israeli Jewish person. That's not the case in the case of Sri Lanka. In the case of Sri Lanka, you have Sinhalese people who, a vast majority. I still argue. I've been to Sri Lanka. I've been to Colombo. I have many Sinhalese friends, and they want to coexist and live peacefully with Tamils. They don't want violence. They they don't want to wipe out Tamil people. That's certainly not the view of a majority of Sinhalese people. It's certainly a view of a very small, very, very small, rabid, ultra nationalist Sinhalese people. And it's those Sinhalese people that the Tamil diaspora choose to focus on and say, hey, look, we can't trust the Sinhalese people at all. So now, currently in Sri Lanka, there's a new government, a third party for the first time has become the governing party since Sri Lanka's independence. They're called the National People's Party, and they consist of a political alliance of left-leaning center-left parties. And they, for the first time, they have a super majority in parliament, which means they have a greater than 2/3 majority, which means they can enact any constitution they want to Sri Lanka. So we finally have this golden opportunity whereby we can implement a new constitution that can address the grievances of the nation's minority communities, but also address the grievances of Sinhala people in the sense that they have an inadequate power sharing structure in Sri Lanka. So we have this super golden opportunity, but the president of Sri Lanka, the president of the leader of the National People's Party, Anura Kumara Dissanayaka, he has been reluctant to get moving on constitutional reform because he wants to address the nation's corruption and economic problems. His argument has been, I'll first address the nation's corruption and economic problems, and then I'll get to constitutional reform. But that argument to me is a very troubling argument because a constitution is the basic foundation of which a nation can govern. You need to have a solid foundation upon which you can tackle economic corruption and you can tackle all these various problems. But if the foundation has not been cemented, if Sri Lanka's current constitutional foundation is majoritarian and centralized, which is what Sri Lanka's current constitution is, then any economic reforms or corruption measures that you put in place are ultimately going to fail because the very foundation is flawed. So his argument doesn't make any sense to me at all. And it's also worth noting that he got this super majority because he got significant support from Sinhala people in the south, but also Tamil people in the north as well. Significant numbers of people voted for him because they were so disillusioned by the two-party system in Sri Lanka, the United National Party and the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, consistently saying that we're going to solve your problems, but when they come into power, they don't do anything at all. So, you had this case in
Apart from endless
2022.
war, apart from endless war and endless austerity.
Yeah. So you had this case. You had this case in 2022 where the president of Sri Lanka was chased out of the country because there was a huge economic crisis in Sri Lanka. The economy had gone into free fall. It was the worst economic recession since Sri Lanka's independence. And so against that backdrop, a third party had come into power who had pledged to represent all Sri Lankans, to tackle Sri Lanka's economic problems, to bring forward a new constitution. President Dissanayaka, he championed on bringing to Sri Lanka a new constitution that would devolve power to the regions, that would give autonomy right down to the local government, that would abolish the executive presidency. This is what President Dissanayaka championed on. And a lot of those promises, they're very similar to what Neelan's proposals were about. So that's why I released this documentary now, because I wanted the Sri Lankan people to mobilize and get the attention of President Dissanayaka and tell him, hey, let's get moving on constitutional reform, because right now the Sri Lankan government, President Dissanayaka, hasn't even tabled constitutional reform within the Sri Lanka's economic budget. There hasn't even been money allocated towards engaging in constitutional reform. So it's not even on the agenda for this fiscal year. So the reason why I released this documentary is to get people informed and educated about Sri Lanka's current governing system, the flawed unitary state, about Neelan's proposals, and to empower Sri Lankans to put pressure on President Dissanayaka to bring forward a new constitution. And I think there was another question you asked before that too, which I'm sorry I forgot.
Oh no, it's okay. I think you answered perfectly. Well, my second to last question is this, which is, what do you say to? Oh well, yes, but yeah. Uh, Very quickly, do you think though that Tamil voices who believe in the united Sri Lanka, and, voices like Dr. Neelan's, that they'll be more comfortable not engaging in self censorship, not being intimidated, and that vision of a united Sri Lanka, will be advanced. But I think you more or less answered, without radical constitutional reform, the kind that Dr. Neelan champions. Yeah, it everything else just sort of gets poisoned and sabotage. Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is a silent majority among the Tamil people who want to coexist with Sinhalese people who believe that it's possible. I think that their voices are drowned out by a small segment of Tamil nationalists who consistently, spread LTT propaganda and hail the LTT leader, Prabhakaran, the Tamil Tiger leader, as being the savior of Tamil people and the separate states, the only answer. Meanwhile, these Tamil nationalist separatists, they ignore their own crimes, their own atrocities for which they're responsible for, and they vilify Sinhalese people as a group as being completely unwilling to coexist with Tamils. So that's why you need your own separate state. But I think so long as the grievances of the Tamil people go unaddressed by successive Sri Lankan governments within a democratic framework, you're going to have Tamil separatists, Tamil nationalists continue to voice the need for a separate state and continue to spout propaganda. So long as the Sri Lankan government's unwilling and reluctant to address their grievances, that's going to continue. Once they address their grievances, then you take away the power, the venom, the vicious poison that these Tamil nationalists have.
Well, that's a perfect segue to my second to last question, which is, what do you say to fellow Tamil folks and those who do solidarity work with Tamil people and advocate Tamil nationhood that it's not possible a united Sri Lanka, given the endless crimes against humanity the Sinhalese state has inflicted on the Tamil people, and like Biafra, you remember the notorious Nigerian civil war, Biafra, which was brutally when it divorced Nigeria, was brutally taken back. I think some would probably argue Bangladesh and Pakistan, they needed a divorce. Pakistan needed its divorce from India. I'm sure some will argue that the Kurds who'd like to divorce Turkey or Iran or Iraq and make a big Kurdistan and elsewhere, where their legitimate grievances are real and discrimination is real, that it's better to have a mutual divorce, however bumpy, than an unhappy marriage where the forced assimilation and erasure of this national identity, that is the issue, not the ethno-nationalism of Tamil Tigers, Kurdish separatism, be it Turkey, Iran, Iraq, or Syria. What would be your response to that?
I think that a democratic framework is the only way in which the grievances of the Tamil community can be addressed. Certainly, the Sri Lankan state has committed atrocities, and they even continue to commit atrocities. So you have cases where I mentioned earlier in this interview, recent mass graves were uncovered in February 2025 in the north, and so there's a Tamil journalist that's been reporting about this, and that Tamil journalist has been detained by the police and has been harassed for exposing this. This is under the new government. So
wow.
you have cases where this new government continues to arbitrarily detain Tamils under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which is a draconian anti-terror legislation. So you could argue it's similar to what the United States did in the post 9/11 era. You have people that
or
are
what
continuing
Britain's
to be
currently
detained.
doing.
Yeah.
What Britain's currently doing against Palestine solidarity,
Yeah.
folks. Yeah.
So you certainly have atrocities that are being committed by the Sri Lankan government, and Tamil nationalists continue to use the fact that there are human rights violations being committed by the Sri Lankan government as a reason for why a separate state's the only answer. And I'm, as a Tamil person, I'm sympathetic to their frustration, seeing a government that was elected, like this recent government that championed on representing all Sri Lankans, to then continue these human rights abuses. But I'm somebody who looks at what is the most feasible way in which your grievances can be addressed within the constraints of the international system as it exists. And within the constraints of the international system as it exists, there's universal support for a solution to address the grievances of the Tamil community within a united Sri Lanka. And a separate state, a separate Tamil state, is once again ethno-nationalism. It's where you have a Tamil only state. And when you have ethno nationalism and democracy, it just never turns out good. I mean, you could just look at Sri Lanka's neighbors like Pakistan, which is a Islamic fundamentalist state, and we see how they suppress their minority communities. You can see in India, which is a Hindu fundamentalist state, but it didn't. When it was founded, it was certainly not meant to be that way. Which was Prime Minister Nehru. He was very clever in the way that he ensured that India would not have an official language of being Hindi, but instead he had come up with this linguistic compromise that would prevent Hindi being the official language, but would give power to the regions. And he was very wise to decentralize power. So he knew that consolidating too much power would then spur separatist sentiments. So Neelan was somebody who took significant influence from that, even in drafting his Union of Regions proposal. That term Union of Regions was something that was borrowed from India's constitutional scholarly work. So in the case of India, up until Modi and his forces had come into power, we're seeing now in India how bad nationalism, ethnic nationalism, Hindu nationalism, religious nationalism, how bad it is. So to then have a separate state, a Tamil nationalist state, and then to say that that will be a democratic state when the Tamil regions of Sri Lanka, the north and east, are very heterogeneous. You have Muslims who, despite the fact that they speak Tamil, identify as their own ethnic group as being Muslims, separate from the Tamils, the Jaffna Tamils. And you also have a history where the Tamil Tigers had ethnically cleansed the north of Sri Lanka, ethnically cleansed them of Muslims. The Tamil Tigers in 1990 ethnically cleansed more than 100,000 Muslims from the country, took their property, all of their assets, and forcibly expelled them from the north. Prior to that, you had more than 100,000 Muslims that were in the north, and they're still left without homes. That's a legacy. So then to have the North and the East, which has all these different ethnic groups, religious groups, and linguistic groups, Sinhalese, Muslims, Indian plantation Tamils, Jaffna Tamils, Christians, Catholics, all these different groups. And then to say that you want a Tamil state, it's once again fueling this ethno-nationalism, and it's just not going to, I don't believe it's going to be successful. I believe fundamentally that Sinhalese people want to coexist with Tamils, and despite the fact that the government's committing atrocities, I think that should empower us more to mobilize and put pressure on this government, this government came to power, got their supermajority through grassroots organizing, through significant grassroots organizing. So they would be more receptive to public pressure than, I would argue, any other government that preceded it from the two-party system. This is a third-party government, the third party that came into government for the first time since Sri Lanka's independence. So I would argue, despite the fact that Sri Lanka is committing atrocities, continues to do so, that should empower us more to hold this government accountable and to not let them get away with those atrocities, and to push even harder for a democratic framework. And that would be my answer.
Brilliant response, and I find myself actually agreeing a lot with what you just said. So, now, final question. Final question is this: can you talk to us about Dr. Neelan's support for not just Tamil Tamil rights and equality, but that is that of Sri Lankan Muslims. And since it's August and Pride is winding to a close, I know this wasn't explored too much in the film, but in your film, you do talk very briefly about how Dr. Neelan was supportive to a degree of civil rights and equal rights for the LGBT community or queer community or 2S LGBTQIA plus community in Sri Lanka. Do talk to us a bit about that, before we wind to a close.
Yeah, so in the case of the Sri Lankan Muslim community, you had a history in 1990 where the Muslim people they lived in the north and the east of Sri Lanka, for centuries and centuries. Uh, in the case in 1990, the LTTE, because the Muslim community in the north, they did not identify themselves as being Tamil. They identified themselves as being Muslims, having their own identity. They did not all share the LTTE's vision of a separate state. And you had a few number of Muslims that were working with the Sri Lankan government as well in terms of their opposition to the LTT's totalitarian control over the north and the east. So Prabhakaran used that as a basis to cast the Muslims as being enemies and to expel them from the north of the country. So more than 100,000 Muslims were ethnically cleansed from the north, given 72 hours to leave the north, and they had to leave behind their belongings, all their possessions. Around this time, you also had a massacre known as the Kutankoti Mosque Massacre, whereby Muslims were praying in a mosque, and LTT gunmen they shot into the mosque, and the mosque was riddled with bullets, and they killed a countless number of innocent people, innocent young people that were praying in the mosque, civilians. And so you had all these atrocities that were inflicted against the Muslim people, and so Neelan, against that backdrop, felt that the Sri Lankan Muslim community also needed to have a voice within Sri Lanka's governing structure. They also needed to have protections as a minority community. And Neelan was very conscious of the fact that the Muslims were kind of spread out, in the north and the east of the country. So in terms of governing and devolving power, there's been disputes about how to govern power given how the Muslims are spread out. So in the case of the north and the east, whether like in the east where there's a disproportionate amount of Muslims, there's more Muslims in the east than the north. So do you have separate north and east province, or do you have a merged province? So Neelan had advocated for a power sharing structure that would not arbitrarily like separate like block by block the land, and to make it difficult for any sort of real power sharing to be implemented, because it would kind of fracture the land like Muslim and Tamil. And so he did not want that. So Neil was very conscious of the fact that there had to be a way in which the grievances of the Muslim people can be addressed within a constitutional framework, but addressed in a realistic manner that could also be implemented. So that was Neelan's vision for Sri Lankan Muslims. He was very conscious of their oppression and the fact that they were an even greater minority than the Jaffna Tamils of Sri Lanka. And I forgot your second part of the question. Sorry.
His
Oh, the
legislation,
LGBT.
legislation
Oh,
protecting protecting the rights, or at least giving some forms of equality to the queer community.
yeah. So in the case of Sri Lanka, there's been in Sri Lanka's penal code. This dates back to the British, which criminalizes sexual activity that's against the order of nature, quote unquote. Those are the words that they use, and this is to criminalize homosexual activity or LGBT activity, which is against the orders of nature, against human nature. So that criminal legislation was on the books. It was on the books. It still it still really hasn't been
Repeat, eradicate.
forcefully repealed. There are the Sri Lankan governments have informally acknowledged some protections for LGBT community, but Neelan was advocating for the fact that this draconian legislation within Sri Lanka's criminal code should be repealed, and he was advocating this in the 90s at a time where LGBT rights, especially in South Asia, which is a very traditional society, a region, that was not being spoken about. So he was advocating for its repeal and for the rights of the LGBT community to be represented and for them to be included. So yeah.
That's awesome. No, no, that's awesome. So very much ahead of his time then. Not afraid to buck trends.
I would argue so, yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end. Well, we were here. We were joined on this program. Sorry to butcher your name again. With Pitasanna Shanmugathas, a Canadian. I always pronounce it very differently, but don't worry, Pizza. One of these days, I'm going to get it right. God damn it.
Well, that's all right.
he's, he's a Canadian indie-documentary filmmaker, journalist, often writing for the Jurist, and people should check out his work there. It's brilliant. The interviews he has there. He's an anti-imperialist and all-around leftist, and folks should check out Truth to the Powerless, 6-part docu-series, and donate to the website. And again, his latest documentary project is Neelan Unsilenced. This is about Dr. Neelan, who, again, was a Tamil Sri Lankan legal scholar, international consultant in international relations, a politician and peace advocate and peace mediator, constitutional scholar and activist reformer who believed in a united Sri Lanka. And again, he was murdered. He was murdered sadly by Tamil tigers who did not share his vision of a united Sri Lanka. And who knows what would have happened? Would have certainly saved a lot of lives and finally and ended that grotesque civil war. I think had he listened to the voice of him as voice of reason. And and just a reminder, folks, 1+1, do again share widely and do donate if you can. And I am still experiencing a lot of problems on Facebook, inability to share widely. So again, if you are watching this, please share widely on on all of your socials. Help us not just overcome the far right algorithms and the monopoly that's that Western media and Western corporate state media has, but do share widely 1+1's content to help our audience grow, especially with these restrictions that Facebook has placed on me. Until then. Good night.
Sorry. Do you wanna just tell people where they can watch Neelan Unsilenced? Should I tell?
I will link on the show notes so that people can watch it there. But go ahead, do plug where they can
okay.
The film.
Thanks. So you can the documentary is for free, and you can watch it on its website www.neelanunsilenced.com. That's NEELAN unsilenced.com, and all my documentaries are for free. And yeah, thank you, Youri.
Yes, and Pizza, again, best of luck in this film. I'm very curious. I'm actually very curious what'll be the response of Tamils who do still harbor a lot of nationalism in a separate state. And here's an open invitation. If any of them have seen the film and want to even have a debate on whether a united Sri Lanka is possible or why they think that it's better to have a divorce, well, open invitation to them. But until then, Pizza, all of my best, with this new documentary, and I look forward to having you back on in the near future, especially with our good friend Eve Angler running for the NDP leadership. But that's another topic for another day.
Absolutely, Yuri, and thanks again for having me on. I look forward to being on your program again someday.
Always an honor. Thank you very much.